I'm Rachel Davison. I live here on the farm. This is one of my daughters, Heidi. Heidi, how old are you, Heidi? 4 years old, so she's my oldest daughter. And I am married into the Davison family. I'm married to Lance, that's Tom and Tamara's only son. Now today I'm going to show you how to make a rhubarb pie. And this recipe is a recipe my mom is famous for. I grew up on the prairies, and rhubarb is a staple in the prairies. It's free, it grows in abundance, and it's delicious when it's prepared right. So today we're going to start by chopping up a bit of rhubarb. I'm going to need about 5 cups. Now you don't want to keep that end. That's actually, the rumor has it it's poisonous. I don't know if that's true or not, but anyway, you're going to cut off both ends and you're just going to slice it up. This rhubarb is fresh from our farm. It's on sale now or for sale I should say, now in the market. And it is very, very good. So I'm hoping to get about 5 cups. The recipe calls for 4 cups, but I've realized that in my pie tin, which is this size, I need just a little bit more to make it a nice full pie. So I'm gonna measure it out in here. I'm using a nice big measuring cup so that I don't have to use a bowl as well as a cup. I'm just gonna mix it all in here. So the next thing we need to do is preheat the oven. Now there's 2 different temperatures for this pie, but we're gonna start up at 400. So I'm just gonna start my oven here, and we're gonna bake it at 400 for the first 15 minutes, and then for the last half an hour, we're gonna go down to 350 so the top doesn't get too brown. We're just gonna set the rhubarb aside, and we're gonna work now with our dough. Now I'm gonna tell you my secret to making an easy pie. Dough that is homemade at the farm instead of in my house. This actually makes the saying easy as pie true. So I'm going to put a bit of flour down. I've got this mat, which is quite handy. It just gives me an idea of the size I need, but of course you can do just fine without it. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to do the bottom of our pie. So I don't go in one direction for very long because I want it to be a circle. So I'm going to stop, make sure I've got flour underneath the dough. I also never roll right off the edge because that flattens it out too much like that, and then your edges are going to be too thin. So you kind of stay in the middle, back and forth, around and around, and if Heidi wants to turn, you want to turn? Okay. So put your rolling pin right in the middle. That's exactly how to do it. Good job. Where'd you learn that? From Nana? From me? We'll go a little bit more here. We want it to be about a 12-inch circle. We need a little bit more flour. Let's check underneath. So I think that'll be about good. You can see it's about, I don't know, I'm not very good with measurements, but it's about that thick. Just a nice size. So I fold it in half. It makes it really easy to put it over my pie tin here. And I'm just going to gently, I don't want to stretch the dough, but I'm just going to gently push it into the corners so that it fills up the whole pie tin. I've just got this little cutter. A knife works just as well. And I'm just going to cut off the extra dough there. I'll set that aside. You can use that for the top, or you can break it in little bits and dip it in cinnamon sugar and bake it. Or of course you can also just get rid of it. So I've got my bottom done, and while I'm in the dough, I'm just gonna also roll out my top so that it's ready. So I just squish it a little bit like that so that it's a nice circle to start with. So the top doesn't need to be quite as big, but of course you don't want it too thick. So we'll just roll it a little bit more here, and that looks about right. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to fold it in half, and you need to have a little bit of a hole in the top to let your steam out, and of course you can make that into a pretty design. So I like just the very classic slits in the pie. I'll do small, bigger, biggest, like that. You could use a little cookie cutter and you could put anything you want in there, a triangle, a heart, whatever you like. Next thing we're going to do is we're going to finish our filling. So I have got things just measured out here, which is kind of handy. Heidi, could you crack this egg for me? I think it's unusual to have an egg in a fruit pie, and I think it's kind of the secret to this recipe. It makes for a very, very nice filling. Good job, Heidi. And we're just gonna lightly whip up that egg. And while Heidi's doing that, I'm gonna add the sugar to the rhubarb. Now, if I was using frozen rhubarb, I would need more sugar because some of the natural sugars, it just gets more tart once it's been in the freezer. But because this rhubarb is perfectly fresh, I'm just gonna use just a little bit under a full cup. If I was using frozen rhubarb, then I would use more like a cup and a half. And I'm going to put the sugar on first because it does pull some of the juices out of the rhubarb here. In a little bit you won't see the sugar at all, it'll just be nice and moist. And Heidi's going to pour that egg on for me. Good job, and we're going to just give it a little mix. So we've got rhubarb, sugar, an egg. Now you see how that egg whipped up really nicely. And that's because that egg is room temperature. Now I know most people don't have fresh eggs that are on the counter, but if you take your egg out of the fridge and just put it in lukewarm water till it's room temperature, that does help in your baking. So we're going to add a little bit of flour, and that's what's going to thicken up our pie. And we're just going to sprinkle it on like that. Give it a good stir. We don't want any lumps of flour, but that's going to make our filling so that when you cut yourself a piece of pie, it's going to stand, it's not going to just fall onto your plate. Now we just need two more things, a pinch of salt to add a little bit of flavor, and just about a teaspoon of vanilla. And that adds a really nice touch of flavor. It doesn't taste like vanilla, it just adds a little dimension. And now we're just going to dump it into our shell. So we've got our shell ready. We're going to pour it in. Hopefully it's the right amount of rhubarb. Of course you can adjust that depending on what kind of pie tin you're using. They're all a little bit different. So that looks about right. You don't want it too full, otherwise it'll be spilling out all over your oven when you're baking. But you don't want it shallow because the rhubarb will cook down a little bit. So you want it just a little bit over the top. So just one little trick is I'm just going to put a little bit of water around the edge of the shell so that when I put my top on, it'll seal. You could use a brush, something like this, but I actually prefer to use my finger, and I'm gonna just a little bit. It doesn't need to be soaking. See, the brush works quite well too. I think we missed a spot right here, and that's good. That'll just kind of seal our dough together a little bit. I'm gonna try to get that design about in the middle there. I'm gonna unfold it. And voila, we've got ourselves a pie. So I'm gonna use my little cutter again, and this time, instead of cutting right up to the edge, I'm gonna cut just about up to there on my fingers, away from the pie crust, so that I can fold it under to seal it. Good, so we've got just a little bit extra dough around the edge that we're just gonna fold under. So I'm just gonna lift up the bottom one and just tuck it under like that. I don't want my edge to be super thick, but this is how I like to do it. I've seen it done other ways, just cutting it right to the edge and just pressing it with a fork, and I think that works just fine too. And the only thing we have left to do is to crimp the edges. Now again, you can do this however you do this, but what I like to do is use my thumb, and I just make, and it just kind of looks like a ribbon around the edge, and I think it looks kind of pretty. Like that. We've got ourselves a pie. I'm just going to put it in the oven here. My oven's up to 400. I'm going to slide it in, and I'm going to set my timer for 15 minutes. And after those 15 minutes go by, I'm going to reset my oven without taking the pie out to 350 degrees, and I'm going to bake it for another half an hour like that. And you're going to leave it in there till it's a nice golden brown, until if you poke a fork into one of your little slits in the middle and the rhubarb is nice and soft and starting to bubble, and then your pie is done. Pie has always been one of those maybe intimidating things to make, but really it's not that bad if you just get right into it. And that's how you make my favorite rhubarb pie.